Okay. Now we're coming up on a topic that the folks in the chat room and I have been talking about quite extensively. And that is that is a host that we shared this platform with. The gentleman was an author, he was a war veteran, and he was a tortured soul. His last post on Facebook on an author page was on April 2nd, 2016. It goes, "It's a chilly, windy, dreary night. I've intentionally dumped my thoughts and concerns over the bedside, hoping they'll randomly arrange into something useful by morning. The knowledge that nobody really knows anything is boosting to a human's morale at first, until the reality of it settles deep into the sand of your mind like a heavy metal. Here are the lot of us, flying on a rock we don't understand through a universe we don't understand with people we don't understand. And there's nobody at the wheel. Only your perception senses the ride, yet your perception can't change the ride. I have learned how to think deeply and in complex ways, and now I'm going to learn how to stop thinking in the interest of rest, riding this rock through a whatever, to a whatever." Words from a gentleman who shortly thereafter would kill himself. And I'm not going to bring up his name, but more the topic at hand as to why someone does commit suicide, and is it anyone else's fault when someone does commit suicide? This gentleman came on to Spreaker, author, had a pretty good show with a great following, was on iHeartRadio, had professional promos the whole bit, did paranormal shows, did shows talking about his own unique take on things. He was pretty good at what he did. He didn't have very many resources to do anything with. And yet, he took what limited resources he had and he made a presence. His book was on Amazon. A few of his books were on Amazon. So in that way, he was somewhat an accomplished author, because so many people write, but not very many people publish. And he published. It was pretty amazing. So, in the interest of the topic, I'd like to bring up that in the last week, a young lady, aged 18 years old, was convicted of second-degree manslaughter in the death of her boyfriend. There were texts found on his phone with her encouraging him to commit suicide. And the real thing of it is that he fought it, and she just kept pushing and pushing for him to commit suicide until he finally did. And it was over days that this happened. So, the bottom line is, he was dead. And she was blamed for pushing him. Now, the very definition of suicide is killing oneself. That does not mean killing. That does not mean someone killed you. That does not mean someone else is at fault. The very definition of suicide is killing oneself. But now, in this society that we live in, it has become clear that suicide is not as cut and dried as it used to be. Now, the courts and the laws are taking into effect and taking into account the very reasoning someone commits suicide and are pressing charges. Why is this important? What does this have to do with this Spreaker host? Well, I'll tell you. During his tenure on Spreaker, this host decided to drift into a group of people who are notoriously cruel to each other. And it's a group of people that I associate with, and it's a group of people that many associate with. But here's the thing. I didn't have a very thick skin when I entered into this group. I know there are several who it's just not their cup of tea. It's just not what they do. Over time, I developed a rough, callous skin towards this group. And now, some of them I'm proud to call my friends. They're fucked up just like me. They're screwed up just like me, man. But at the same time, I think we understand each other because we are all screwed up in the same ways. We all want the same things. We all desire the same things in certain ways. We're all from all different walks of life, but we all desire to get on this microphone and have our voice heard. And this gentleman was one of those. He was an author, as I said before. He wrote 2 science fiction books, which I believe are still on Amazon. But he came on with a show basically talking about the truth of what he felt and his unique take on things as a veteran and his unique political views. That was all well and good. It got him iHeartRadio. It got him that free subscription that I was talking about earlier. But in the end, he ended up getting in this group of people who was just not his group. I mean, sometimes you're in a group of people and you may have 1 or 2 things in common. But when those 1 or 2 things are small and that's it, and everything else is just not to your liking, you leave that group. One would imagine. This host was roped into several different, I guess you could say, radio wars on Spreaker. And I hate to dramatize it, but these are really classic, just bash sessions. If you've ever listened to radio by Opie and Anthony or by Howard Stern, you understand that these guys mention other hosts and completely slaughter them. Turn them inside out and upside down. There is a draw to that here on Spreaker, because you have freedom to say whatever you want. You can be reported, but most times nobody cares about the reporting. And I never reported a single person who ever said anything about me. And believe me, there have been several who have said very unkind things to me. And I just realize it's all part of the show. Or at least that's the way I think about it. If they really feel that way about me, then there's nothing I can do about it. I'm me. But, anyway. So, this host got roped into being in the middle of a debate between 2 warring factions on this platform. And it's really funny because on this platform there are factions of people. Or at least there were at one time. It's calmed down quite considerably. But there were factions of people on this platform at one time. Groups of people who would support one podcaster. Groups of people who would support another host. Several different groups of people. And he got involved in this particular war. And it turned out that some of the people that he was, I guess you can say, crossing, decided that it would be a good idea to read a document on the air. And this wasn't just one host, this was about 2 or 3, who read a document on the air, a court document, that made this host look like he was a spousal abuser. Now, from what I've heard, none of this was really true. This host made the mistake of having a child with a woman who wasn't exactly sane. But, aside from that, the reports of abuse were rather unsubstantiated, and I don't believe there was any time done by said host in jail, and I don't believe that there were any charges pressed But forever, his daughter that he had with this woman saw her daddy as something different than he probably was. The sheer humiliation of that, if that were to happen to me, it would be terrible to come back from. Even though court records are public documents, I cannot even imagine the dirtiest of the dirty laundry being spread out all over the internet for people to see. Worse, for people to hear in the very groups of warring factions that you became a part of, that I became a part of. I've had a few different things happen to me on this platform. People who have made claims against me, but nothing as heinous as this. And when I look at the timeline between what happened and the time this host took his own life, it's interesting that it was just a few short months. Now, let's think about this for a minute. If this host were to kill themselves simply before how they were perceived on the internet, one would have to think, first of all, that this host was not very stable to begin with. This host was a veteran, did say he suffered from PTSD. However, it was during this time, this period of time between when the documents were read and when he took his own life, that his mother had gotten sick. This gentleman was very ill himself. He had terrible pain in his back. It was hard for him to walk. He could not get an appointment at the VA to save his life. There were other extenuating circumstances. His relationship had broken up around the same time. So it wasn't as though this little document, which is public record, by the way, anybody could find it, was the one thing that made this guy say, well, time to end it all. If you read through his social posts, he's quite dark. His thought process was quite dark. Many thought it was just a gallows sense of humor. But unfortunately, it wasn't. The guy had a gallows way of thinking. It wasn't a gallows sense of humor. Some people have a gallows sense of humor, which means they have a dark sense of humor. They can joke about practically anything. Generally very self-deprecating people. But when you ask them if they're okay, they're honestly okay. This dude was not honestly okay. This guy was in some serious mental and physical pain. And part of it was that he was disappointed. And this is my own belief. I don't know what anybody else thinks about this guy, but my own belief, knowing this guy, I knew him, I did business with him. This guy was, my personal belief, he was not cut out for what he entered, and he was disappointed with life in general. And he had a very, very high opinion of himself. This guy thought that he was one of the better science fiction writers in the world. This guy thought he was one of the better radio hosts in the world. And he was probably, and this is just my thinking, he was someone who thought that he should be more famous than he is. He should be a bigger deal than he was. And he just wasn't, it wasn't happening for him. I could imagine this gentleman looking at his Amazon stats every day saying, did anyone buy my book? He had very low sales on his book. Looking at his iHeartRadio stats and seeing that only the same few people tuned in to listen to him. He wasn't growing. He wanted to be a media star. And he wasn't.